Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you, we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
You've done all the city tracking.
Yeah, I've done a lot of cities at night, and then the nighttime aurora and time-lapse sequences of Earth. Many of those that you see have been done in this module.
Hello? Hello? Anybody home? Hey, think with fly.
We call it a shutter, and it protects the windows from micrometeorites.
Okay.
The shutters are closed, the windows are protected, and also thermally insulates the windows from the radiation environment of space.
So what happens if you get a leak on that?
Then you have a leak. Then you have a leak.
What happens if you get a leak on that?
Then you have a leak.
Okay, Biff. Well, I'll finish that on up tonight, and then I'll bring it over first thing tomorrow morning.
NASA urine recycler, test 1, sample 1. It's the first water we've got out of the machine. This will allow astronauts to recycle their urine and sweat into beautiful, clean, clear drinking water. First sample, transparency, subpar. Oh, that's just piss.
You search images of Earth from space, you're gonna see that image. I mean, why would you have fake images and computer animated images of Earth when you can have the real thing?
I've been discussing time and warping time and time-space with some famous scientists. I'm doing something up in Canada which may sell, they may sell that show called The Truth Is in Our Stars. And I've talked to Michio Kaku and David Suzuki, and I'm going in a couple of weeks to talk to Dr. Stephen Hawking. And I tried to get through his book, A Brief History of Time. It's not brief. And it doesn't have much to do with history. And everybody I've met who is acquainted with the subject, I'm continually asking, look, I hear space-time all the time. No, space-time, it's space-time. That without space, without time, it's time in the space is the time. Hard to comprehend what it is. Well, I don't comprehend what it is, so I ask these very important people who are working in the field, what is space-time? And they say, well, the gravitational force takes the photon of light and it bends the photon of light. So without space, without time, you cut the time that comes. I said, well, wait a minute. If in 13, and I said this to Dr. Kaku, in 13.5 years, he says, no, 13.8 billion years. He corrected me by 0.3 billion years. If that photon, I said to him, if that photon of light at that farthest galaxy takes 13.8 billion years to reach my eye, isn't that time? And he said, yes, but the space-time and the time and the space and the space and the time. And I couldn't understand, my opening sentence to everybody, including it will be to Dr. Hawking, what is space-time? And I can't, and I know 17 people just raised their hands. I'll tell you about space-time. But it's a concept that I just can't get through my head.
Well, you can understand time, the passage of time.
Are you going to explain to me what space-time is?
Yes. And you can understand the idea that there's space, there's a distance between you and these 6,000 people.
Wow. You said that with a measure of pride, too.
Yeah.
Creation, 6,000 people are in the audience.
But it takes a certain amount of time
Yes.
for you to pass from here all the way over to the other side of the auditorium.
Right, that's space.
That is time going, that is time going through space.
You see, that's not what they mean at all. That shows me that you have no idea. I mean, so the guy said, one of the gentlemen said, well, there are 3 dimensions, space, length, width, right? And then you have the concept of time. So something happens within that space, you got time. That's the 4th dimension. Yeah. And I said, well, I get that. Something happens within a cube, and you have time, and then you have length and breadth and width. And I get that. What's the 5th dimension, I said.
That's a fantastic band.
A fantastic band. That was my first thing. So I said, just give me another, because he said there's 11, then he said there's 17, and then I heard lately there's 26 other spaces,
dimensions,
multiverses. No, wait a minute. So I said, well, just give me one other dimension. I don't care about 16 or 17 or 26. What is the 5th dimension? Give me another dimension. And the answer is, we can't conceive of that.
You know, right.
So
that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
well, it doesn't mean it does exist. You know, so I mean, so I said to Dr. Taku, he said, it's in the, because he's working on string theory. You know about string theory.
Yeah, and I find that incredibly confusing too.
But we're not talking about the stuff you wrap a package about, Adam. It's vibration of some kind in a string. Okay? So I said, he said, it's like music. I said, well, I understand an orchestra with vibrating instruments. I got that. What do you play? What's your instrument? What do you do? When you get up in the morning, doctor, what do you do? And he says, it's all in my head. I think. I said, well, how do you prove what you're thinking exists? Because it's all theory. He said, well, I've got this very elegant
numbers, equation,
yeah. Very E, B divided to 7 to 4. It's all in his head. How do you prove a black hole? How do you know those gravitational waves proved the collision of 2 black holes?
Somehow, eventually, they are able to observe phenomena.
No, they can't observe. It's too far away. It's too theoretical. How do we know what they're saying is true? You know what it really is? It's all science fiction.
So does that make you a skeptic?
No, well, science fiction says, this is a story that I'm making up. And there's this thing called wormholes. And that's a science fiction concept. Although these scientists say there are wormholes. How do you know? The mystery of science fiction is what I'm talking about. Science and science fiction are essentially the same.
It is clear from these rarely seen color television pictures that the crew of Apollo 11 brought a high-resolution color video camera with them on their mission. Yet the only pictures broadcast live from the moon's surface were these from a low-definition black and white camera. In fact, the networks complained because in addition to this, they were forced to shoot the images second generation off of a projection TV of the technology of 30 years ago and were not even allowed to take a direct feed, which further degraded the quality and clarity of the images. From an analytical standpoint, photographic anomalies have to be sought out with an understanding of lighting and shadows. The most straightforward is simple. When objects are lit solely by the sun, as all the scenes on the moon were said to be, after all, lighting equipment was not only impractical, it was unnecessary in bright sunlight, then all shadows, regardless of the landscape, will run parallel with one another and never intersect, as shown by this example. In these seldom seen photographs, obtained from a rarely used auxiliary NASA archival site, it is clear that these scenes were lit with artificial light. These shadows, which are cast at different angles, are evidence that a second light source is being used. In addition, the sun would not cause an isolated hotspot like this, only an artificial light would. Again, intersecting shadows and another hotspot. And again. And again. In this magnification of an Apollo photograph, a rock, very likely a papier-mâché prop because of the crease here, is categorized with the letter C. In later releases of the same picture, the letter is gone, probably airbrushed out.
On the moon, the astronauts' only source of light was the sun.
They had no extra lighting, no flashes or things like that.
Yet in this photograph from Apollo 14, the shadows are cast in different directions, suggesting multiple light sources.
The shadows cast by the rocks in the foreground should have been east-west, like the LEM shadows.
And in this photo from Apollo 17, again the shadows are pointing in different directions.
Outside in sunlight, shadows always run parallel with one another, so the shadows will never intersect.
Conspiracy theorists say it's not just the shadows that indicate the use of additional lights, but what has been photographed in the shadows. For example, here's an astronaut who descends into a huge shadow cast by the lunar module. Yet his entire body is still visible. How is it that he is not shrouded in darkness? Here's the same maneuver from another Apollo mission. Again, the astronaut is brightly lit in what is obviously dark shadow. And in this picture, the sun is directly behind the astronaut. His figure should be a silhouette. Yet even the smallest characteristics of his suit are recognizable.
It seems like he's standing in the spotlight. And I can't explain that. That escapes me. Why?
And finally, in this picture with the sun behind the lunar module, the front of the craft is clearly visible. The words United States are crisp and clear. How could these backlit pictures be so detailed?
It's because there's more than one light source, which means they're not on the moon.
It has been estimated that as many as 20% of Americans believe we never went to the moon. Is it really possible that NASA deceived the world? According to a former astronaut, it's entirely possible.
Regarding the Apollo mission, I can't say 100% for sure whether these men walked on the moon.
Bill Casing was an analyst and engineer at Rocketdyne, the company that designed the Apollo rockets.
There were many problems that evolved during the 60s that led people to believe that we're never going to make it to the moon.
Casing observed that despite the clarity of deep space, the stars were missing from the black lunar sky. He saw the American flag waving, even though there is no air on the moon. And he discovered that there was no blast crater beneath the lunar lander, where its powerful rocket engine had fired.
The noise level of a rocket engine is up into the 140, 150 decibel range. In other words, enormously loud. How would it be possible to hear astronauts' voices against the background of a running rocket engine?
Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward, drifting to the right a little. Contact light. Okay, engine stop.
Is this evidence that the footage is actually fake? A sequence shot in a controlled environment here on Earth? Just months before this historic landing, a prototype LEM was flight tested at Ellington Air Force Base. While NASA cameras record the test flight, Neil Armstrong struggles to control the unwieldy craft. Then, at approximately 300 feet, the lander flies wildly out of control. At the last second, Armstrong ejects. And floats to safety. If the lander was so unstable and difficult to fly in the controlled environment of Earth, then how could the LEM land 6 times flawlessly in the alien environment of the Moon?
The LEM had a single engine mounted dead center, and then they had little push jets, thruster jets, a couple of them up on top. This was supposed to control their attitude as they came down. Well, I'll tell you a secret. The instant you moved your tail in that cabin an inch, you would change the load pattern, it would begin to tilt, and it would start that thing spinning.
The fact that there's no blast crater under the LEM is one of the most conclusive pieces of evidence that I find supporting the hoax.
In fact, no sign of a blast crater is visible for any of the 6 lunar landings. Yet NASA's own scientific illustrations clearly depict a blast crater.
Then there's one other point. If they had truly landed on the Moon, this dust would have then descended on the lunar lander, on the foot pads, and we find not a trace of dust on the foot pads. In the footage of the ascent stage going up, what you don't see is an exhaust plume coming out of the rocket engine nozzle.
What a ride, what a ride.
But what do we see? We see the ascent stage suddenly pop up without any exhaust plume whatsoever, as though it were jerked up by a cable.
It's absolutely unreal.
Although it appears that the astronauts are moving in the Moon's gravity, which is 1/6 that of the Earth, Percy notes that when the speed of the film is doubled, the astronauts appear to be running as if in Earth's gravity. Also, when the footage of the lunar rover is doubled in speed, it looks as if it's driving here on Earth. If there is no air or wind on the Moon, why is this American flag waving?
The fact that the flag flaps on the Moon where there's no atmosphere means that there must have been a little blast of wind out in Area 51 where they shot this.
These 2 photos seem to have the same mountain backdrop, yet the lunar module is only present in one of them. Seemingly impossible, since the LEM never moved and its base remained even after the mission.
What a ride, what a ride.
Some suggest the same artificial backdrop was used when shooting 2 entirely separate pictures. Background discrepancies are also apparent in the lunar video.
The best evidence are some pictorial anomalies in the photographic record of the trip to the Moon. There is one for Apollo 16 where the same shot, the same hill, appears in 2 different days.
This tape was shot on what was reported to be the first of Apollo 16's lunar excursions.
But it couldn't pick a better spot.
And this video was from the next day at a different location.
That is the most beautiful sight.
NASA claims the second location was 2.5 miles away. But when one video is superimposed over the other, the locations appear identical. For reference, crosshairs were permanently etched into the lunar cameras, so they would have to appear on top of every image. But in this photo, a crosshair is behind a part of the lunar rover.
This situation is impossible and has to be the result of technical manipulation and doctoring of the image.
And in this photo from Apollo 11, the equipment in the foreground is covering the crosshair, not behind it. And in another from Apollo 12, the American flag is covering one crosshair, and the astronaut is covering the other.